co-founder of the Michael Collins Centre in Clonakilty, County Cork, to say a few words.
Thank you, Stephen. First of all, I'd just like to congratulate the Garda here in Pearse Station for remembering this very special occasion, because I suppose, as Anya has mentioned and as a lot of historians have outlined over the years, it was a pivotal moment in the history of the Irish independence, which I think outside the Rotunda after 1916, when Michael Collins saw the way that Tom Clark was being treated, and also how the DMP detectives and so on were picking out the different leaders. Collins knew from that moment that the British were controlling Ireland basically through the police force at the time. And 100 years ago this morning, that whole idea in his head was reinforced even more when he went through the files, and even read his own file, as I has mentioned there a few minutes ago. And he did a good chuckle when he read that he came from a brainy West Cork family. Now, I won't keep you too long. I know another speaker in a minute is going to talk about Ned Broy's influences when he was growing up and listening to stories in Kildare of 1798 and so on. Well, Michael Collins had influences like that when he was growing up between Clonakilty and Rosscarbery in West Cork as well. As most of you know, Michael Collins' father was 75 when Michael was born. And if you do your sums, Michael was born in 1890, so that meant that Michael's father, Michael John Collins, was born in 1815, which was only 17 years after 1798. So when Michael's father was growing up in the 1820s and 30s in West Cork, the history of 1798 was still very fresh. And of course there was only one battle fought in Munster in 1798, that was the Battle of the Big Cross. It was fought north of Clonakilty on the 19th of June. And it is said that Michael Collins' grandfather's first wife died in 1798 as a result of some incident involving British militias. So obviously the Collins family were affected by what happened in 1798, and that was all passed on. So the 1798 stories, Michael would have been listening to those from his father, and then of course Michael's grandmother, her maiden name was Johanna McCarthy. She's probably famous today because it is reputed she invented the recipe for Clonakilty black pudding. And a lot of people reckon she did, and there is a historical link there. But on a more serious note, Michael remembered listening to his grandmother, Johanna, telling him stories of how she remembered seeing the famine victims lying on the sides of the roads around West Cork in the 1840s. And of course you heard of the old saying, Clonakilty God help us. Well, that goes back to the conditions from during the famine times. Now, Michael's brother Johnny, who has already been mentioned, and he did a great interview with his nephew John Pearse from the Stole. John Pearse recorded Johnny Collins in the 1960s before Johnny died. And in that interview, Johnny mentions that as a schoolboy, about 1891 or so, he remembered seeing an eviction taking place just outside of Clonakilty. So the land war again and all the evictions, of course, Michael Collins grew up listening to all those stories as well. And they had a big influence all of these stories on his thinking. Now that's just Michael Collins' early days, and of course he went to school in two local villages, Lissabard, his local village, about 2 miles away from where he was born when he was about 5. And then when he was 13, he went into Clonakilty, and he spent a year and a half studying in the National School in Clonakilty for a career in the British Post Office. And when he passed that exam in 1906, at the age of 15 and a half, he immigrated to London. And of course he spent 10 years over there, and he would come back then in 1916 to this city, and of course he fought in the Easter Rising, and his public life, I suppose, began at that time. Now I move along to another subject, the connection between Michael Collins and West Cork, and of course that's the day that he was shot, his final journey. And I've had a lot of work put into that over the last couple of years, just picking up stories, and that's what I just outlined for you this afternoon, just a number of stories that we've come across from that fateful day. Now, sometimes you get the impression that Michael Collins almost had a sort of a premonition on that journey, that he wasn't going to be coming back to West Cork again, because he met so many of his relations that day. And he called to a place between Rosscarbery and Clonakilty called Caherbeg, to a first cousin's house, and he was travelling along on the road with the convoy, and he spotted some of his first cousins up in a reek of hay, building a stack of hay. And Michael got out to the car, stopped the car, walked over to the Haggard gate, put his elbow open the gate, and he shouted to his cousins up in the haystack, "Put a good top on that, we're due a bad winter." And his cousin shouted back, "To off the coat there and come on over here and give us a hand." And there was a bit of slagging went on between the cousins. And then he moved on down the road about a mile to a place called Cool Craheen. and he went into another first cousin's house. And this time, his aunt Ellen Collins was inside in the kitchen baking bread. And Michael went over and he put his backside up on the kitchen table in full military uniform, and he started swinging his leg as he often did when he visited her before. And of course, his elderly aunt got a bit of a fright, and she said, "God, Mickey, how's it you thought to come to see me?" And he said, "How could I forget you, ma'am, and all the little trousers you was made for me when I was a young fella." And again, almost like he was saying goodbye in many ways. And then of course Michael went over to Sam's Cross, not too far away, and it was the famous pub, the Four Alls. And Michael went in and he paid for a round of Rassler, the local stout that was made down in Clonakilty for his men. Because most of the men in the convoy had never drank the Clonakilty brew, so he wanted them to taste it. And while that was going on, Michael went across the road into the O'Brien's house, his first cousin's house. And there he met his brother Johnny, who had been caught up from the farmyard. And they did a short conversation and a cup of tea. And as Michael was leaving the front door to get into his car to pull away, Johnny tapped him on the shoulder and he said, "For God's sake, Michael, would you get into the armoured car, don't somebody shoot you?" And Michael Collins turned around and he laughed and he said, "Surely they're not going to shoot me in my own county." Well, we know what happened about 2 hours later. And around that time as well, there was a woman's voice called him from the upstairs window of the O'Brien's house. And it was his first cousin, Mary O'Brien. And she just given birth a few weeks before to her new baby. She just got married a year or two before. And Mary shouted out the window to Michael, "Be careful, Michael, things are very dangerous with the war and all of that." And he turned around to her and he said, "Don't worry, Mary," he said, "it'll all be over soon." Now, he was talking about the Civil War, but she would remember that comment to Mary. Oh, he was a married name for the rest of her life. Now we have Nora Owen and Michael O'Mahony and Maurice Collins here today, and Paul Moracoo, grandnephews and grandnieces. And Michael and Nora and Maurice, well, this story kind of applies to them because the day that Michael Collins was shot, their grandfather Johnny told Michael that 2 of his daughters, Michael's nieces, Mary and Kitty Collins, were inside in a shop in Clonakilty waiting to be collected by Johnny Collins that evening. They'd been sent into Clonakilty that morning to 2 girls to get measured up for school uniforms. So Michael had a tremendous love of his nephews and nieces. Michael loved children and he loved old people. He once said that he was much more comfortable with old people in the dark than with young people in daylight. But he also loved children as well. And Michael stopped the convoy outside of number 25 Pearse Street while he knew his 2 nieces were waiting. He ran into the building, and Nora and Michael's mother, Kitty Collins, aged 10 at the time, when she saw him come running in, she started running around the kitchen table from him because he was always tickling them and messing and all of that. And eventually Michael caught Kitty, she was aged about 10, and he lifted her up and he was about to give her a big kiss on the cheek. And she said, "Put me down, Uncle Michael, I'm too old to be kissed." And it was the last thing she would say to him, because of course again he was killed 2 hours later. Now, just a few more short stories to finish up. I often wonder how is it, you could say, Cult Chief from West Cork, Michael Collins, got on so well with the Dublin people, what he did. And it was probably because he had some great, he was a hard man, a ruthless man when he needed that, but he had a great human side as well. And one of the great joys that we have down at the museum at Clonakilty is listening to the stories that visitors would sometimes pass on to us. And one day, and unfortunately I haven't got the names, but there was a lady from Dublin who came to the museum, and after her presentation she came up to me and she started telling me a story. And she said, the woman we were talking to was probably about my own age, mid-50s, and she said, my mother, when she was a little girl, had very badly turned eye. And her mother's parents had a shop here in Dublin during the War of Independence. And one day during the War of Independence there was a gunfight broke out somewhere on a street here in Dublin outside of this lady's grandparents' shop. And there was bullets ricocheting off of lampposts, and there was people diving for cover and people screaming and all of that. And in the middle of this mayhem, this strange man ran into this lady's grandparents' shop, vaulted the counter and hid under the shelf under the counter. And 2 seconds later, all these police and military stormed into the building, ran upstairs, and they started turning up beds and throwing out the contents of wardrobes and all of that. And after about a half an hour, they left without finding the man they'd seen running into the building. Anyway, when the police and military left, the strange man got out from under the counter, dusted himself down, straightened his hat, And then he went over to the shopkeeper inside the counter, the woman, and he shook her hand and he said, "God, ma'am, thanks for not telling the police that I was here." And then this strange man, as he was about to run back out onto the street, turned around for a second and he saw the daughter, the little girl, aged about 10, with the turned eye. And he went over and he got the little girl, he lifted her up and he put her sitting on the counter, and he looked straight into her face. And he said to her, "I want you to tell everybody from now on that I said you're the most beautiful girl in Ireland. And if anybody asks you who said it, well, then you tell them it was Michael Collins." Now, of course, at that stage, Michael Collins was a huge legend and everybody was talking about him. But nobody knew what he looked like. And the shopkeeper, the mother, said, "Actually, he's only saying that he's not Michael Collins at all." But anyway, the War of Independence ended, and suddenly for the first time, Michael Collins' photographs appeared on the paper. And the woman recognised the man. It was Michael Collins. And the girl with the third eye had an operation, the eye was fixed, and it was her daughter that we were talking to. And when she was telling the story, there was a tear trickling down her face. So that's a great example of the human side of Michael Collins, and I think that's why so many people were willing to do what they did for him, risk their lives and all of that. And just to finish, folks, just a quick quote. I wouldn't know Dublin very well, but I've been told that the City Hall is about 15 minutes walk in that direction. And of course, Michael Collins was laid out there after his death. And after the treaty was signed in early 1952, when the new provisional government was meeting for the first time, they had some of their meetings in the City Hall, and Michael Collins had an office there. And he actually had a plaque on top of the mantelpiece of his office, and the following quote was inscribed on the plaque. "I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labour and strife, to preach the highest form of success, which comes not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, from hardship, or from bitter toil, and who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph." And of course, that quote came from Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States, and that plaque was on Michael Collins' mantelpiece. Good morning.